Thank you for joining us for our session, and apologies for the slightly late start. The session beforehand overran ever so slightly. So we can get started. Again, thank you very much for attending our session. This will be quite an interactive session, so please don't expect me to be speaking to you all throughout this session. We want it to be a participatory process where we have a bit of a workshop around developing a startup act. So just a quick introduction to me. My name is Belinda Barr. I am a co-director at the Innovation for Policy Foundation. We are a small not-for-profit organisation that focuses on placing people at the heart of decision-making. And this is inclusive of our work in entrepreneurship, where we essentially work to make sure everyone has a seat at the table when developing policy when it comes to entrepreneurship and startup policies. So today we're going to do a bit of workshopping, as I said. I will start this session with just a bit of an overview of I4Policy again and our processes when it comes to startup act development. We'll go a little bit into what a participatory approach is and why it's important. We will go into our framework that is called ADDIS that we use to help us develop our startup policies, but it does go beyond that, and I'll go into more details around that soon. We will then actually have an active workshop where we will create a startup policy for a made-up country called Limora, and we'll get into that in more detail. We'll ask you all to pitch for your startup. We will not necessarily do a vote, but we'll have a bit of a conversation around what is most important when it comes to why you chose the mix of policies for your startup act, and then we'll close the session. So, as I mentioned, we want this session to be interactive, participatory, and not just myself, and soon my colleague Mike will also introduce himself speaking throughout the session. So just to start, I'd love a couple of volunteers to say something around a policy, a regulation or incentive that you think could either support or hinder startup progression or entrepreneurship working in your context. Okay, I'll come back. Feel free to introduce yourself as well. Oh, there's someone there. Okay, great.
Check. Oh, hi everyone. Shaquille Cruz. I'm with Nevada, the state. I used to be from Georgia, and I had to say Georgia, the state. So, in national context here, I think we've liked the idea of a sovereign wealth fund for the state of Nevada, but it's just been hard to get across the finish line. So I think that's one of our more audacious wish list policy initiatives.
Great, thank you so much. Would anyone else like to offer an example or an idea?
Hi there, Steve from Enterprise Educators UK. Measuring graduate outcomes by looking primarily at employment, not self-employment and not startup.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi everybody, State of Kansas. We support startups through tax credits for their investors when they raise funds.
And we just have one more over here.
Hi everyone, my name is David. I was going to say tax, but he's already said it. But things like even incentives for companies, for some of us, I'm from Nigeria, so maybe government incentives towards starting up businesses. How easy is it to register a business? How easy is it to manage and all of that? Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I noted that everyone has spoken about policies that would support startups and not really thinking about those that will hinder. And that is great, because that is exactly what we're doing in this session. So to go on and just give you a bit of insight into the work that we do and what this workshop is about. So decision thinking, and we'll be leveraging, like I said, a process, a methodology called ADDIS. But just to start and giving an idea of what decision thinking is, it is essentially a process to support decision making. It is a way of making sure that individuals are able to deeply engage in improving decision-making processes, especially within a participatory policy-making process. And ADDIS, which we'll go into in more detail, is an acronym that is a type of decision-thinking approach. It is to support policymakers to develop inclusive policies in a participatory way, but it also can be used to develop any or support any decision making. It could be from what you're going to have for dinner, or what holiday you're going to go into in terms of developing it in a participatory way, but we're using it here specifically in the entrepreneurship space. It stands for agenda setting, drafting, decision making, implementing, and sense making. And this is the full policy making cycle. You can see that there also are a number, I think there's about 14 sub-steps. And even though it's in a cycle, it doesn't necessarily have to follow a cyclical pattern. But we'll go into that in more detail. So first, why is participation important? Why a participatory approach? We found that it improves policy quality. Making sure that those people who are going to be affected by a policy are part of the decision-making process naturally will make it more likely to be a success, because it's more likely to be relevant. It's more likely to be tackling the challenges that have been uncovered by those who are on the ground, and if they're able to also co-create the solution, it's more likely that the policy that is implemented is of good quality. It strengthens trust. When participants are included in decision-making processes, they feel valued and feel that their opinion is worthwhile. So they're more likely to, one, know about the policy, but also have buy-in in terms of actually being able to use the policy for their own purposes. And finally, it reduces polarization. It means that people are able to have a conversation about what works for them. It means that there may be opposing ideas, opposing thinking in terms of what policy is most appropriate, but by having a discussion, you're able to come up with a solution that works for everyone. So it's more likely to reduce polarization and come to a proposal that actually suits everyone. So at i4Policy, we have developed and used a number of different tools to increase participation. Here we have workshops, public forums, surveys, and polls. And one of the workshops is a policy hackathon, which we will essentially be doing in a very, 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 very small way in this workshop today. But it's essentially a quick fire way of uncovering challenges that, in this context, entrepreneurs face, and then coming up with the solutions together, so co-creating the solutions. It doesn't necessarily only work with just the entrepreneurs. In this process, we like to make sure that there are a number of different stakeholders that are representative of the actual ecosystem. So that would include academics, that will include people who provide finance, that will include hubs and innovators, those support organizations that are making sure that entrepreneurs have the support that they need to do well. So it's not only uncovering the challenges for the entrepreneur themselves, but the ecosystem as well, to make sure that the solutions are holistic in kind of being able to uncover and solve some of the challenges that are raised. We have public forums in terms of being able to have open discussions. Surveys, we have another platform called the Citizen Engagement Platform, which enables people to actually give their opinion and thoughts on policies that are being developed. We've used this in a number of different occasions. It can also be used in this setting. And then general things such as polls. Another way of being able to gain insight into what the ecosystem is thinking and how to move forward with that. So, going back to ADDIS, an approach to actually building a startup act. So as I mentioned, ADDIS is an acronym for agenda setting, drafting, decision making, implementation, and sense making. There are a number of kind of parts to ADDIS. You may not be able to see from where you are, but agenda setting has care, initiate, and define, for example. For agenda setting, this is where you identify and prioritize the challenge that you're trying to solve. So in this instance, it might be that the challenge is there are not policies that are relevant to supporting entrepreneurs in your particular context. This is where you define what that looks like. You have the drafting stage, so potential solutions and strategies are developed. This is where we would use a methodology such as a policy hackathon to get ecosystem players into a room together to uncover the challenges and co-create the solutions. Decision making is essentially making a final choice in terms of what the next step should be. If the decision at the agenda setting phase was to develop a startup act, it would be what needs to be done for it to then be moved into the implementation stage, where you're putting your decisions into practice. That might be actually developing the laws or policies that are necessary to put this into law in your particular context. And then sense making is around reflecting on outcomes from the process, which again may be the final startup act, and this point could also include some monitoring and evaluation in terms of how well the policies that have been developed are doing. So, one of the biggest questions we have found in the work that we've done in the past is the definition of what a startup actually is. So generally, they're defined as companies that are in the first stage of operations with the ability to scale and grow rapidly through the utilization of new technologies. They're engineered to grow quickly and significantly. It's still quite a broad definition, and different countries have very specific pieces as part of their definition of startups. For example, if a country needed to create a startup label, for example, there'll be specific criteria that would be needed to be met for it to be considered a natural startup. The key elements from the work that we've done as well is essentially just the number of years and kind of the thing that separates it from being just a small business versus a startup. So number of years in existence and its size, the majority of the capital owned by individuals, and the growth potential, essentially the innovation part of startups. And here you will just see an example from the Tunisian Startup Act, just kind of showing some of the key elements that are used to define what a startup is. So we have age here, where there's no more than 8 years in existence. Size, no more than 100 employees, and 5.3 million in total assets or annual turnover. Independence, more than 2/3 of capital must be held by natural persons or investors. Innovation, and you can see the last two are discretionary. Strong innovative character defined as providing an interesting and differentiated solution to a given problem. This is obviously at someone's discretion. It will change from person to person, but usually there is a committee that will sit down to figure out exactly where a startup might fit in this, whether they fall in the innovation space or not. And then finally, scalability. Another discretionary piece, perceived growth potential, product market fit, and proof of concept and team capabilities. As I mentioned, the last two are discretionary, and it comes to, I guess, being in the game for a while to be able to discern the difference between a small business and a startup. We have centered our work on startups on around 7 common challenge areas that most people and most organizations that work in this space roughly fall into the same category. So we have finance, market access, business support, governance, culture, infrastructure, and human capital. These are essentially some of the pieces that we use to be able to assess an ecosystem, a startup ecosystem, across mainly, our work has mainly been in Africa, but we hope to go beyond that in future. Very quickly, I'm going to briefly touch on two case studies. The first in Senegal and Nigeria, where I4 Policy was integral in supporting in the participatory approach. So firstly, Senegal, they had incorporated their Startup Act around 5 years ago. And here you can just see a very quick timeline in terms of what they did to get to the point of start to end. So there was a roundtable session to kind of outline the agenda setting phase. We conducted a policy hackathon, training first to help us support local Senegalese conduct the policy hackathons in their context and to uncover the challenges and co-create those solutions. There was a stakeholder review that included a number of different stakeholders as well as Parliament and different members of government to support in developing and finalising the Startup Act. They were essentially working together to develop the Startup Act. The online consultation chatbot was actually a Facebook-led approach where we used Facebook to open for 1 week, I think it was, to allow other people who were not necessarily in the rooms when conducting the policy hackathon to be able to give their insights into what was being offered in the Startup Act. Went back to a co-creation committee. As I mentioned, the cycle goes back and forth. You can see there are different layers there because we start at agenda setting, move on to drafting and decision making, and then go back to just refine and make sure that everything is in order before passing it on to higher level policymakers. There was a town hall meeting with the president to present the Startup Act before it was eventually submitted by Cabinet to Parliament, and then its eventual passing by the National Assembly in 2019. And then here is just a quick overview of some of the incentives that were included in the Senegalese Startup Act. So you can see here an open policy process that we were supporting, where over 1,000 citizens were engaged. There are many, many, many co-creation activities, 20 iterations of the Startup Act, so it's not necessarily a quick process. And then innovative platforms like the Facebook chatbot that I mentioned was used to engage with stakeholders on the ground. And here are some of the benefits: easier access to information, reduced taxes, IP support, and R&D support. And it became a 2020 finance law, so benefits for all small businesses and startups. So just a few of the very specific provisions that it included. Taxes that simplified from 11 different rates to 2 rates. There was a 60% reduction in fees and a 3-year tax holiday for organizations that were deemed to be in the startup phase to support them in their development. Finally, quickly touching on the Nigeria Startup Act, I'm going to ask Oswald to give us a few words, as he was very, very integral in this and can give a much better overview of the process than I can. Here you go. Thanks, Oswald.
Hello, everybody. So it's always good to talk about startup acts. I saw the picture, I started smiling because that's my boss well, they're all my bosses. So the Nigerian Startup Act, which, in the very beginning, looked at what happened in Senegal, and the level of citizen participation is what really excited us. Seeing that you can create a situation where citizens are able to participate in the process. I think when I first saw the document, the idea of a chat box was always interesting. So the Nigerian Startup Act is the NSA Startup Act 2022, October 2022. If you think about that, that was pretty much during COVID. So how do you do citizen participation when there's COVID, right? So it was left to using things like WhatsApp, chat boxes, and finding different ways of engaging franchising, right? So you couldn't travel to everywhere in the country. When you have, in the regulatory process for getting the act passed, you must go to the 6 major zones of the country. How do you do that when there's no flights? So this process drove a level of creativity that allowed us to start thinking of different ways that we can engage people at the far ends of the country without ever leaving, the capital. So in one time there was actually 2 different engagements happening in 2 parts of the country at the same time, because the core team never had to go there because we were engaging, speaking like a government person, still the masses, using a participatory process which is based on the ADDIS. So definitely, the other thing when we first saw this was, how do you break up diverse teams and create, a situation where multi-actions are happening disparately and at the same time to get an outcome. So obviously you have a team that's drafting, you have a team that is dealing with engagement, you have a team that is dealing with of course, the management and implementation of the actual process. And these were all different individuals, and they all met, literally just like this, met in the middle. I guess we took the actual diagram, because we actually saw this diagram at the very beginning, took the diagram very, very literal. And, to have a core team that drove these different aspects of agenda setting to drafting to ultimately decision making. But the process, and what's interesting is, I was just saying this outside, sadly, in Nigeria and a lot of African countries, the process of creating an act takes, it could be 4 or 5 years. Ghana, my sister here is from Ghana, is still on it, and I think it's taken over 5 years already. The Nigerian Startup Act, with this aggressive process, took 14 months. And I think a big part of it had to do with COVID. But we will never know till we have a chance to try another policy in Nigeria to see if the process works the same. But that's pretty much it. The act passed in, you have a detailed slide. My first time I've seen this. Okay, fantastic. 7,000, I would say more than that. Yep. So we were able to build a very massive coalition. What was interesting about volunteers was that we had people we couldn't even use. Like, okay, you're smart, you have a law degree, but I already have 10 people who want to draft. What am I going to use you for? So it got to a point we actually had people who just reposted. Everybody wanted to participate. And what I would say is one of the most, interesting about just having this argument outside, one of the most interesting things about running it through this participatory process is that till today, everybody feels they own it. Right? So it's a case where people still talk about it and say our act, which is usually, actually that's the wrong word, which is very unusual for policymaking. Usually it's government has done it and government is blamed. The act is mostly referred to as a collaborative outcome, and anything that's done to the act or from the act is seen as, for us hasn't been done. The concept of for us, by us was big. I had to, as a government person, I had to kind of tone that feeling down, but there was a very strong feeling of ownership, which exists till today. I would say that the other thing the Act attempted to do, you see with the consultative forum, it tried to take that collaborative nature of the process of developing the Act into the actual document. So in the Act, we have the idea of a forum which pretty much brings government and private sector together to be able to create and solve problems for the ecosystem. Because the thing about an Act, a policy, you can't cover for everything, right? You'll be 3,000 pages. So you have to develop an Act that is actually thinking and is able to take in new problems and solve it as an engine in the Act. And what's interesting about this Nigerian Act, it's being replicated by other countries in some aspects, sometimes completely, the whole thing, and made better. For instance, Ethiopia, where their Act is actually based on the Nigerian Act, but a lot better than the Nigerian Act. And we see that we can only have more improvements on what the future outcomes will be in a number of acts. But a number of African countries are looking at startup acts as a way to bring focus to the ecosystem within the continent. There's also the other approach of just really going to the different aspects of the policies that need to be touched and just touch them directly. But, different things are being tried. Is there another slide? That's it? All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oswald. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague now. We're going to, like I said, this is going to be a workshopping session, so I hope everyone's excited to speak with their neighbours. We might have to do a bit of moving around, but we want to kind of simulate what it would be like to develop a startup act, but in a participatory process. I can do that, don't worry.
Thanks, Belinda. Thanks, Oswald. So thank you very much. What we're going to do now is simulate a hackathon. So we're going to role play a multi-stakeholder dialogue and try and come up with a startup act. So we have a fictional country, the Republic of Lemoore. Lemoore is a low-income country with a fast-growing youth population, which might sound familiar to some. The government wants to come up with an act to boost jobs. One of the key criteria that we're going to have for this exercise is that there's a budget allocation of $100 million over the next 5 years. So when we're coming up with the different incentives, the different support schemes, there's going to be a cap. You're not going to be able to do everything. And this process is about negotiating, working out what is best, finding a compromise. I'll leave this on the screen for the duration of the workshop, so you can see the sort of criteria. We're going to have 3 different roles. So to start off with, we're going to split into groups, and we need at least 3 people on each table. So some of you might have to move. Ideally 6 would be perfect, but 3 is a minimum, so that we get a different stakeholder on each table. We'll hand out different role cards, so you'll all be playing the role of either a startup founder, an investor, or a policymaker. So there'll be the 3 key roles. And then you'll go through this exercise. We've got a worksheet of working out how we define a startup, what are the eligibility criteria, so on. You'll see the different things that we have to decide. So we'll break out into groups, go through the exercise, and then you'll come back together and pitch your startup act to the group. That's the idea. Leave that there. Okay, so that's time. So we're going to come back together We'll each take it in turns to share the startup hack that you've co-created together. So yeah, who would like to go first? Over to you. Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Well, I'm gonna do my best to shoot this out. So what we define in the startup, we picked the first three, which is one of them was a company under 5 years. And if you guys want to step up and ask the reason why, I'm just going to shoot it out. Company under 5 years, majority owned within the community, within the Lemurian cities, using technology or innovation in its product and service. That was the first three. Why? First of all, technology, since we're in a technology age, technology definitely was on the list. As far as the majority and the citizen, it's because you want to do it within the community, where the money stays within the community. And there's a lot of talent within the citizen. 5 years, that was a toss. So I'm gonna move to the next one, next page. So what we looked at in terms of set eligibility criteria, most must be legal registered, at least one founder under 35 years. It must demonstrate an impact on job creation or local problems. And the last one has a prototype or MVP. Why must it be legal registered? Obviously, we all know that, why it should be legally registered. If it's not registered, I wouldn't invest in it. And by the way, I was one of the investors. At least one founder under 35 years of age. I think reason why that is because per you. And besides, my take on that is I was also a prototype, not a prototype in life, but I was an engineer and created a lot of prototype at a very early age. So that was one of my pros where I did that. Demonstrating an impact on job creation, definitely if it has an impact on job creation is key, because then they can hire more. Number 3, choose innovation and incentive and support measure. Says select 4, I picked 3. First was cash grant for early stage startup. The third one was voucher programs for legal accounting service. And one of them, the third was revenue-based repayment loans. What was the fourth one? We have 4. Because it says 4, I have 3. Startup, and the fourth one was startup visa to attract diaspora and regional founders. Number 4, government investment scale. It says, decide how your team will invest your $1 million. Assets to finance was credit guarantee funds for SME loans, finance literacy and investment readiness boot camp, public procurement support funds for startups, digital startup registration, data portal, monitoring evaluation on units for startup policies, National Entrepreneurship Awards and Recognition Program, entrepreneurship curriculum development in schools. We skipped business support. Last one was infrastructure, sharing co-workers hub with high-speed internet. Why did we choose these? Well, it's a little funny story. You know, when you go to a restaurant, don't look at the price. Just look at what you want, you know, and go for it. So kind of went for it. So that's what we did, really. So, what was the total? What we had left was 60. We had 63 million. Yeah, so we're a little bit over, even though the market changed, we had no effect. So have faith. Let's go for it. I don't suggest to try that at home. Don't try. We're experts. We can do it. Number 5 was draft regulatory.
Just in the interest of time, we don't need to go through every question.
Okay, we're done. The biggest disagreement. The government official was very strong about having local residents for businesses than outside coming in. I agree with that. We kind of went through it a little bit because my perspective is we should balance it out, have local and perhaps other investors come in. But we came to a conclusion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We don't need to go through every question. Just again, focus on like a summary. What your any highlights and what challenges. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So our team kind of thought about creating a educational component to the startup with a vocational pathway component. One is because I am a educator and faculty at Cypress College, and I'm an artist, so we kind of try to put that whole idea together, however, with some online learning for our Lumora students, right? So I guess the criteria that we were having some issues with in the business barrier were the few internet access, because we know the country itself, born in Angola, and I know how this is. We have some areas that are very rich and some areas that are very poor, so we can't have them in equal strength. One area will have more than others, right? So we're thinking about what the investments want, training people to create a sense of returns, people being successful. So that's basically how we're thinking this through. So our startup, we thought about the majority of Lumorians owning the business for them, yeah. Also less than 250K in annual revenue. So the revenue size to better indicate how they're gonna create and how they're gonna succeed, yeah. And also has the potential to scale nationally or regionally. Super important. One of the reasons we want Lumora to be successful, not just in the country, but also all over the world, okay? We were having some arguments with this. There's a lot of debate, but we made it work. So for question number 2, which is set eligibility criteria, we said that must be legally registered by the government. So SBA, centralized registration. However, the government could at least remove some of the barriers, because we know when the government owns everything, it takes a long time to get it together. So remove some of the barriers. Also, the founder must be under 35, because we're talking about education, we're talking about youthful people. So, you know, I guess the government would want someone a little younger. Participants, right, in an approved incubator with training, accelerator, and also demonstrate impact on job creation or local problems, yeah? And we have to have a prototype. We must know what the product is. It has to have some sort of physicality, so then to prove the government that this is what it's supposed to be. So physical representation of what success or visual success of the startup, and provide data for success of the startup, how services are being used, and what is it for, all right? Number 3, choose incentives and support measures. We thought about adding a voucher program for legal and accounting services. The cash grant was a toss-up. We didn't know if you want to do that. Public procurement preferences for startups, and also innovation vouchers for R&D and product testing. Could be a tax credit for the company. All right. Is there anything else? So we're also, and this was also a toss-up if we're going to give grants to schools. However, there was a back and forth on that, because sometimes if you give it to the organization, the money disappears. So we thought then just give the founder of the product the money, so then he or she can distribute it accordingly. I thought that was a better idea. And then lastly, number 4. Well, we started off with 100 million. However, Lamora got some financial issues, so we had to be cut down. So we ended up with 49, giving 49 million, and we kept the rest. So, right? Boom, yes. So we gave financial literacy and investments readiness boot camps, and then public procurement support funding for startups, and the digital startup registration and data portal, entrepreneurship, curriculum development in schools, and accreditation programs for entrepreneurial support organizations, and share co-working hubs with high-speed internet. No, those were, oh, do you want the cut ones? Okay. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Our team, we started with the back of the packet, what services we were going to offer first. And for those, we selected Credit Guarantee Fund for SME, Financial Literacy and Investment Readiness Bootcamp. We selected Digital Startup Registration and Data Portal. We selected Human Capital Startup Skills and Mentorship Program, Incubator Expansion in 5 cities, and our budget came to $67 million with a $3 million surplus. After we selected which government investments to scale, we then went back through the packet and looked at defining our startups so we knew who we were going to invest in. We ultimately selected all of the criteria, except for we did strike through has the potential to scale, and we struck through national or regional because we want them to scale all over the globe. In terms of eligibility, the only one we had initially required was must be legally registered. We did not require them to be under 35. For the last 3 options, to participate in an incubator, demonstrate an impact on job creations, or have an MVP, they must have one of those options. So it's an or for those 3. In terms of the incentives and support measures, we chose the tax holiday. We had a $3 million surplus anyway. The voucher program for legal and accounting, the startup visa to attract diaspora and regional founders, and the innovative voucher for R&D. And in terms of draft regulatory framework, we did this simplified online business registration to align with our overall strategy, the IP registration system, and the fast track license and permit system. And to support investor confidence, we chose a capital gains tax exemption and dispute resolution. And in terms of things we gave up, our trade-offs, we traded off co-working space and entrepreneurship curriculum, and solely because we lacked budget, and those were our last priorities. In terms of anything else we would add to support our public official buy-in, we would like this presented by our public officials. And what helped us build consensus on this was we had an awesome team, and we all had a shared vision for entrepreneurship. So we had an awesome team.
It was something. Oh, yeah. We had an issue with trying to define certain terms. And because we didn't define any of the terms, I didn't think we need to stop on one particular term and be held up. So one of us said, overruled, move on. Done. That's what we did. And it worked.
Nice. So you had a veto system, basically.
We had a what?
Like a veto. You could just say no.
Well, an investor power.
Okay. Okay. Were there any, from any of the groups, were there any unresolved issues? Was there anything that you did just have to park? Maybe you could share some examples?
Obviously, you threw us the curveball, and that made it a little bit more difficult. And it meant that we ended up having to take some short-term decisions rather than long-term decisions, which is a bit annoying because we'd like to take those long-term decisions, but that's probably the reality of politics.
Thank you.
And budget cuts. It's reality. Budget cuts.
And who came out best? For the 3 roles, was there a winner? Yeah.
Why do they have to come out best? Because a good compromise is good for everybody.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, no, I was just curious in terms of how the conversations went, if it was, I don't know, you felt guided by the investor or really focused on the founders. But yeah, that's great. Having heard the other policies, did you think twice about anything? Is there anything you're still unsure about or you'd like to change your mind on?
There was one note defining a startup has to scale nationally and regionally. We want to scale internationally as well, so we added that as a note.
Thank you. Okay.
I know no one asked my opinion, but I have to say, I like that you didn't include the provision for under 35s because I would not qualify as an entrepreneur if that was the case. So I like that. Pabnani?
I think we had a few things that were unresolved. One of them was the less than 250Ks in annual revenue, because we felt that was just such a. It's on the one. First of all, it's revenue. So even if it was $1 million, doesn't mean that you're profitable. So maybe in the future we could look to think about changing this to net profit, and also, why is that? If you're in an infrastructure business or in a different sector, 250 may be very small or very large. So I think that we had a problem with that. And then we had a lot of investment. I think it was, under Section 6, we had quite a lot of debates. The first one was trying to hack the first bullet. Our view is that, why should an investor be exempted for making capital gains? So surely the time dimension matters there. So if you come to a country and you invest X amount of money and you make profit in 3 years, why should you be exempted? You took a bet and you made money, so be taxed. So we ended up kind of proposing that maybe what we should say is capital gains tax exemption after 3 years. So what that does is it also, the policy should try and disincentivize people from taking their money out, and also we should tax them because they're not from that context. So to do that, we must encourage them to at least play a long-term game, but also we propose this tax, what we called an investment cliffs. So if you invest 3 years, within 3 years we don't tax you. Sorry, we tax you. If you invest between 3 to 5 years, maybe we say, well, we'll tax you X percentage. If you invest for 10 years longer, and then, so the incentive is based on how long do you have the skin in the game. to try and discourage investment. So that was quite interesting.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much. The intention of the workshop was to get everyone thinking about what it takes to make decisions in a participatory way, especially when you have a vested interest as a particular stakeholder in this particular instance. But ultimately, I think the decisions that are made are better for the collective when you do that. So thank you for participating. We really appreciate it. At the back of the cards, you'll see a QR code that links to our ecosystem.build website. It has a whole bunch of resources that have been developed by the Innovation for Policy Foundation, but also a number of different partners. So Pamlani here at the AGCAE, we have some resources from Utrecht University, also Smart Africa, and a number of other resources as well. Not just the ADDIS framework, you'll see that it will link you to a number of different methodologies, tools, resources that we hope will support and help you in your policy journeys, and you'll be able to get our contact information from there as well. And please do share your contacts with us. We would love to engage and continue to engage with you. But thank you for spending the last couple of hours with us. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session.